watching the Cox Channel. The State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable, presented by Cox Communications. And now, here's your host, Fred Morgan.
Hello, and welcome to the State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable. This show is produced in cooperation with Cox Communications to discuss business issues around the state of Oklahoma. The legislative session has kicked off, and one of the big issues this year is going to be wind. And we're very fortunate today to have two people who are very knowledgeable. Steve Vavrick, who is the Chief Commercial Officer with Apex Energy, and we have Jeff Clark, who is the Executive Director of the Wind Alliance. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks for having us.
Jeff, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your background and how you became the Executive Director of the Wind?
Sure, happy to. And again, thanks for having us on the show. My background is primarily legislative and working in lobbying for various business trade associations. I came to the Wind Coalition after working for the Technology Association of America, where I worked with high-tech companies on their energy agenda and their legislative programs around the country. And before that with the State Chamber in Texas, where I worked on a wide variety of business issues, including economic development.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your family and what your hobbies and interests are.
Married, 2 kids, and spend a lot of time at soccer and basketball games. That's a primary hobby, and I'm an amateur photographer. So I do a lot of photography around Austin, sports and portraits.
Okay, and I got to ask you, tell us a little bit about the Wind Coalition, what it is and who's involved and what its purpose is.
Sure. The Wind Coalition was created to represent the wind energy industry, and which is made up of developers, of the manufacturers who build the equipment, the towers, the turbines, and the operators, the developers and the operators of wind farms that are taking an abundant resource that we have all over this region, that being wind power, and turning that into electricity for consumers. We were created to represent the industry within the Southwest Power Pool, which is where Oklahoma sits, and in ERCOT, which is the grid that supplies most of Texas. And so in the central United States, running from Texas all the way up to Nebraska and the states on the edges, the Wind Coalition is representing this industry in state capitals and in front of regulatory organizations.
Okay. How many members are there of the Wind Coalition?
There are 30 companies that are members of the organization, and that we have individuals who are supporters of the organization as well, people who want to see additional wind power brought to the market.
Oh, I know this is a hot topic right now. Steve, you're with Apex Clean Energy.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. I've been developing power plants my entire career. So for the past 20 years. I've been doing wind power for the past 10, since 2005. Apex, we are a company based in Virginia. We have over 100 full-time employees. We've grown tremendously in the last few years. And we are currently building 3 new wind power plants, one in Illinois, one in Texas, and one in Oklahoma. The first wind power plant we built was here in Oklahoma and in Canadian County, and the one under construction now is in Beaver County. So we have projects across the United States, over 50 projects in 20 states, and then 6 projects in addition to the one that's under construction here in Oklahoma. So we're really excited to be here. I live in Virginia. I'm married with 3 boys, 8th grade, 6th grade, and 4th grade.
Wow.
So yeah, lots of things going on. I was thinking about, is that my hobby? But no, that's really my #1 job. And then I go to work during the day, to fill in the rest of it. But we're excited to be here in Oklahoma. It's important to Apex because we feel our company's mission is to take renewable energy assets to market. And what is the environment here in Oklahoma is really one of the best in the country to do that. And that's a combination of the investment environment, but also the regulatory framework as well, which is very welcoming for capital investment and job creation and lower power prices in Oklahoma. So we're thrilled to be here, and we want to make sure that Oklahoma remains as a leader in wind power in the region.
Why the expanded growth in Oklahoma? What's driving that?
Sure, lots of reasons, and I think we could probably answer this together. The most basic reason, like any energy company, you go for the resource. And maybe we can show that map that we brought here, but we call, Oklahoma sits in what we call the wind belt. If you look at where it's windy across the United States, Oklahoma is one of the best resource states in the country. I think compared to is similar to Texas.
Similar to
Kansas?
Texas. Oklahoma, the wind resource and that wind belt that runs straight up the center of the country. It's the West Texas Panhandle. Yeah. It's Oklahoma. It's Kansas. This resource, and we think of it. And Steve mentioned that he's been in the power business for quite a while. Yeah. But wind is, when we look at wind, I like to say look at wind in the same way you would look at a gas field or a shale play, right, or a seam of coal or any other energy resource. Oklahoma is positioned perfectly because Oklahoma has that wind energy resource, and it's of course the topography is very welcoming, and in Oklahoma you also have farmers and ranchers who have been particularly recently struggling with a pretty crippling drought. Wind represents a huge opportunity for farmers and ranchers to develop an energy resource and provide another income stream for their farms and their families, and so it's a welcoming population of landowners, an incredible wind resource, and of course growing markets where we're able to provide power to the cities, but also to a growing oil and gas industry that is very power dependent and needs electricity for their growth. It's part of I think a very beautiful all of the above strategy, where Oklahoma is developing oil and gas and also wind, and making itself very independent from other states where traditionally you've had to import power. Now you're able to provide more of your own power.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we have a lot to talk about, but right now we have to take a break, and please come back and join us as we continue to discuss wind energy in Oklahoma. Welcome back to our visit and discussion about wind energy in Oklahoma. We have as our guest Steve Vavrick of Apex Clean Energy and Jeff Clark of the Wind Coalition. Gentlemen, before the break we were talking a little bit, and Steve, you mentioned that Oklahoma has a good regulatory framework. What are some of the factors that make Oklahoma so desirable for development of wind energy over other states, especially legislatively?
Sure. Well, as Jeff was mentioning before the break, first we look at the resource. The resource has to be there. But then you choose which state are you going to then further invest in the project. We look at a number of factors. Regulatory certainty is number one. You look at what's been happening recently, what is the legislature's overall attitude towards capital-intensive businesses. Because one thing about wind power compared to other types of power plants, you invest all the capital up front, because you don't buy any fuel. The fuel comes for free. So all your risk as a business investor is up front. So you're looking for some sort of indication of what the environment's going to be for the next 20, 30 years. So how the legislature acts, how the governor acts is very important as you're making that decision. As Jeff mentioned, the governor has an explicit all of the above energy strategy. That's tremendously important to our investors.
So that means like oil and gas, solar, wind, all of the above.
Exactly.
Okay.
What is available to Oklahoma, and let's make the best use of the resources available to create a diverse and low-cost price of power for all of its ratepayers. And that's really that combination of the resource with the regulatory environment that is leading more and more investors to invest in Oklahoma. A typical project, for instance, the one we're building in Beaver County, it's called 300 megawatts, which represents the size, amount of power that it can produce in any day. But in dollars, it's about $450 million. So each one of these projects is a $500 million project, more or less. But there are, what would you say, at least a number of projects being built, planning to be built this year, with other projects behind that. So we're looking at tens of billions of dollars of capital investment that are looking at the environment and the tone set by the legislature and the governor in Oklahoma. So far, it's been very positive, and that's why you're seeing the capital flow, which is bringing more power plants, more supply, basic economics, more supply, the price goes down. And you're seeing that from ratepayers, utilities are talking about the savings that wind represents, and then manufacturers, as they're making their decisions about where do I invest, where do I expand operations, where do I put that new facility, the price of power and the risk to the rates they're going to pay over the next 20 years is one of their decision factors. And this all comes together in a very nice combination where the more wind power, it's lowering the rates to ratepayers, attracting more manufacturers, creating more jobs. Right now it's a very virtuous cycle, and we want to keep that going. We think it's a good combination of factors.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about capital investment,
Yeah.
because that's a business term, but for a lot of our viewers, they may not understand. You have to go raise the capital, either
Right.
borrow it or get people to invest, and the capital is used to buy the big turbines that we see, the lines, all of those things. That's how the capital is used and invested, correct?
That's right.
Okay, and so when you approach investors, you've got to tell them when they're going to get paid back. There has to be a return on their capital, and that's why it takes, is it 20 to 25 years to get a basic payback of their capital? Is that approximately what goes on?
Well, I would say they're looking for certainty. So when you, compared to other sorts of power plants, a natural gas power plant or a coal-fired power plant, obviously the cost of the equipment's important, but the cost of your fuel over your life of the project is certainly a big factor. With wind, you don't have that. So really the risk you're taking is how much wind will blow, and then the price you'll receive for that power. How much wind will blow? One great thing about, another feature about Oklahoma is we've known it's windy here. It's been windy here for a long time, and you can really bet, and that's what these investors literally are doing, that it's going to stay windy. In addition, there's actually tremendous weather data resources here in Oklahoma for all the reasons we know why. So with that data, with that expectation, you can bet that it's going to stay windy in Oklahoma. So then it's price. So getting to your point, investors are looking for long-term certainty on the price that we'll see for the power. So typically our power purchase agreements define a fixed price for 15, 20, or 25 years, depending on the project. So we're able to, when you see construction start on a project, that means the owners of that project have found a buyer for that power for 15, 20, or 25 years at a price that won't change. Or as opposed to other forms of power generation, the price, by definition, they have to pass their fuel costs onto the consumer. So it'll depend on the price of natural gas or the price of coal or whatever they're using as fuel. Okay. It goes up or goes down, but that's one of the features, one of the differences.
And that's one of the best things we add, what Steve alluded to about certainty. One of the things, the challenge legislatively is that the investors who are looking to our companies and saying, we want to invest in Oklahoma, but we have some uncertainty about what the future holds. What will the legislature do? What direction will the government in Oklahoma take? Will it still be welcoming of wind power? When we have the certainty to invest the $500 million in these projects, one of the things that we bring to the table as a benefit, of course, we're saving water by not using it to generate electricity. We're bringing down the cost for consumers, as PSO and OG&E and GRDA and in their announcements have identified close to $1 billion worth of savings for consumers. But one of the things that Steve has mentioned is that we bring a level of certainty. Of course, by having certainty, we're able to invest it, but we bring a level of certainty that we can guarantee our price in the long term. So for a state like Oklahoma that's working to attract manufacturers back to the state, working to attract industry back to the state, that the ability to say we can guarantee your power prices for the long term, that's a key input for manufacturers. We're able, through the product that we offer, that long-term electricity, we're able to add some certainty to other business owners, which I think has that multiplying effect and economic development potential for the state of Oklahoma.
What has the legislature done to encourage that type of development? I'll ask you that.
Sure. Well, the legislature has done two primary things. One is a property tax exemption, a temporary abatement of property taxes at the local level. as authorized local communities to do that. That allows us to be competitive with states like Texas and Kansas. The other thing that the state has done is a production tax credit that actually pays a small amount to for every megawatt hour of power that's produced using wind. There's a production incentive that goes with that. Those incentives were put in place. Interestingly, Oklahoma for a long time had no incentives, and folks who remember traveling to the panhandle of Oklahoma and looking into Texas and seeing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of investment in Texas and in Kansas, Oklahoma wondered, why are we not getting those investments here for the benefit of our local communities and those school districts? And the state put those incentives in place in order to attract those investments. So today, of course, projects are still being built in Texas, still being built in Kansas, but now Oklahoma is just competitive when companies like Steve sit down and look on a spreadsheet and say, where will we invest? Oklahoma's now at the table where historically they weren't.
Okay, let's follow up on that. What are the benefits to Oklahoma by developing wind farms in Oklahoma?
Individual farmers and ranchers, our projects are built on private land. And so for the individual farmer or rancher, there's the opportunity to be a partner in these projects. It's a long-term relationship, but they are paid for the opportunity to have that project on their property. Right now in Oklahoma, and this data is about 2 years old, and we've had some new projects, but in 2013, there was about $22 million a year that flowed from wind power companies to private landowners for the use of their land. Of course, there's also the wages that flow. During the construction period, there's a lot of activity that takes place around wind farms as they're built, but in their operational phase, we've got another $15 million as of 2013 that flows into in wages to those people who are keeping those farms operational. And then, of course, after the abatement period on the taxes, we've got about $34 million a year that flows in the form of local taxes that are collected at the
and those local
level.
Taxes go to school districts, correct?
Go to the school districts. And I think what's critically important, Fred, is to remember is the communities where we invest are not communities oftentimes that have other major capital investments that are coming their way. For them, a $200 million, $400 million, $500 million wind farm is transformational, and in many cases makes them less dependent or completely independent from state aid for their school districts and able to pay for their own schools, which is great.
Very interesting. We need to take another quick break, gentlemen. And please come back and join us as we continue our discussion about the wind energy industry in Oklahoma. Welcome back to our visit about wind with Steve Vavrick of Apex Clean Energy and Jeff Clark of the Wind Coalition. Steve, let me start with you. Sure. We talked about all the advantages of developing both taxes and capital investment. What about the cost of electricity? What does this do, development of wind? What does it do? I understand Oklahoma may be like the 5th lowest cost state for electricity. What's that going to do to the cost of electricity both for Oklahoma and nationally?
Fred, the good news is it's getting lower. Wind power lowers the cost of electricity to ratepayers. Already the utilities in Oklahoma have estimated over $2 billion of ratepayer savings. So what does that mean? That means compared to what they were going to do, the sources of power they were going to buy, they've saved $2 billion. That goes right to the ratepayers. They lower your rates. That goes to manufacturers, which means manufacturers can hire more people. You can spend less every month on your power bill. That's a direct benefit to ratepayers. However, there's more to the story, and this is the interesting thing. First of all, you can't run everything on wind power. Just a power network depends on a range of power supplies. It's kind of like an orchestra, and there's an orchestra conductor that's figuring out who plays what when, depending on the conditions. So wind power is taking its role alongside natural gas and coal and nuclear and solar and these other forms of power supply. But the question is, what's going to be the next one? As we're looking towards all the federal regulation risk, price risk, water risk, siting risk, everything for the next 20 to 30 years, what's wind power's role? The great news is it's the cheapest alternative right now for new build construction in Oklahoma, and it's getting cheaper. There's one thing I just want to emphasize. Why is it getting cheaper? Well, it's not because the fuel cost has gone down, right? No fuel cost. It's still zero. It'll be zero tomorrow. It'll be zero in 20 years. What's going down is the cost of the turbines. Why? Because more and more of these are getting built around the world. This is why Siemens put a facility in Wichita as well as in Woodward. That's why GE built a facility in Pensacola. That's why Vestas, which is from Denmark, put a facility in Colorado. They're building these things across the world. So as every tower gets put up, as every project gets completed, the next project's going to get cheaper. The next project's going to get cheaper. So you're seeing this directly then pass through the ratepayers. And that's the virtuous cycle of this. Compared to other forms of power generation, which technology is going to make it more efficient, but because of that fuel cost, because they have to buy a feedstock, and every manufacturer knows this, there's things you can control and things you can't. But because of that, there's no commodity risk. The cost of wind power is going to keep going down.
And when we say lowering the cost for ratepayers, we're talking about not just consumers, the person who flips on their home power. We're talking about businesses who rely on electricity to manufacture things and do that. So their cost is coming down, which makes the cost of their products cheaper as well. Correct?
Exactly. And again, I'm sure they'll have manufacturing guests that talk about their daily budget cycles. But when you're thinking about, am I going to expand that line? Am I going to hire those 50 more employees? One of your factors is, what are my feedstock costs? And the more certainty you can give a utility, they can then give the manufacturers, their ratepayers, more certainty about their budgets. And so it's a combination of both the cost is going down, but the certainty is getting better as well. Another example, more modern manufacturing, are data centers. So there's a classic one where electricity is a bigger part of their costs.
Something like Google. Exactly.
Great example.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to take another quick break. We'll come back with some final thoughts in our next episode with Jeff Clark and Steve Vavrick as we continue our discussion on wind. Welcome back to our discussion on wind energy in Oklahoma. Gentlemen, I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the impediments to future growth of the industry. What do you see? Jeff, you want to start?
Biggest impediment to future growth is uncertainty, unreasonable regulation. The changing, one of the things that we're working with the legislature on right now is restructuring tax incentives. As this industry grows, that those incentives may need to change to show as the industry has grown from its infancy into its adolescence and is becoming a more mainstream source of power. Those incentives may need to change, and we're working with them. But I think the biggest impediment is uncertainty, and what this state is doing, I know that the governor is doing it exceptionally well, and you have legislators who are doing it exceptionally well, and that is sending a message to the country that Oklahoma is an energy producing state and that Oklahoma is committed to producing using an all of the above strategy, that you have some coal resources, relatively small coal resources, but you have vast oil and gas resources, and those need to be developed. But you also have a vast, an infinite supply of wind, and that is also going to be a key part of Oklahoma's energy mix going forward. Sending that message to the country and sending a message to Steve's company and to companies all over the world that Oklahoma's open for business, that we're open for investment, that we want you to come here, invest your capital, put the people to work, and grow these property tax bases and help these school districts. One final thought for you, Fred, is that as wind grows, historically we've burned a lot of fuels like coal, and the technology in those in coal burning power plants is a very slow ramping. It's a very slow ramping type of fuel. The more wind we use, the more natural gas we use, because wind and gas are very complementary. The newer technology, gas turbines that are being used ramp very quickly, and so I think wind and gas together are a beautiful solution for Oklahoma. The technologies are complementary, the fuels are complementary, and I hope the state will stay the course with a message that says all of the above.
One final quick question. Where can people find out more about the Wind Coalition and Apex Clean Energy?
Best place you can find us online at windcoalition.org, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions that any viewer might have.
And we're apexcleanenergy.org.
Okay.
.com, sorry,
.com.
apexcleanenergy.com.
Okay, gentlemen, fascinating discussion, but that's all the time we have for today. And hope you'll come back next week and join us for another edition of the Oklahoma Business Roundtable, sponsored by the State Chamber and Cox Communications.
Thank you for watching the State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable, presented by Cox Communications. If you have questions about this program, email the Chamber at okstatechamber.com. Set furnishings provided by Scott Rice, creating effective workspace from the floor to the ceiling and everything in between.